Well, as Coach was saying, this is the first practice debate. So with that, I would just like to extend thank yous to everybody for being here. Of course, to my part.
I'd like to thank everyone for being here today, being the beginning of the debate, the opposition team, the proposition team, and of course the judge. Now, we are debating Keynesian economics has failed. Now, start off the round with some definitions, or go on define the round. We will then place a burden on the opposition team and then define judging criteria. Now, so do a quick definition. Keynesian economics is the use of government stimulus and monetary policy to stimulate demand and off-put recessions. Now, failed is as obvious, unsuccessful at achieving goals. Now, we'd like to define this as a factual round, of course. Now, for the burden on the opposition team. Now, as being a factual round, we being the proposition team will uphold our side of the motion, being economics has failed. But we would like to say vice versa. In order for the opposition team to win, they should uphold the opposite and prove that Keynesian economics has not failed and has in fact been successful. Now, Judge, when you get to that final minute at the very end of the debate, we'd like to define our judging criteria as weighted examples. Who has the weightier examples, weightier points, contentions? Now, I have 3 contentions for you today, so I'm going to dive right in. The first being our major point is that Keynesian economics has never worked. Just in the last 60 years that it has been used in the US, we have had 9 recessions. 9 in the last 60 years. Now, wasn't the point of Keynesian economics to offset recessions, not allow them to happen? Now, obviously, Keynesian economics has already failed, just by the fact, in fact 9 times, just by the fact that we've had 9 recessions already. Keep that in mind, Judge, as I take that first PY.
Can you explain the direct link between the 9 recessions and how that was affected by Keynesian economics completely?
Yeah, I can. Now, Keynesian economics, which has been put into effect in the United States in the 1930s, the point of it is to put money into the economy so that it doesn't allow the economy to go through recessions. Now, just the fact that the United States, where Keynesian economics has been put into effect, has gone through 9 recessions, shows that Keynesian economics has been ineffective, as the point of it is to not allow a recession to happen, while 9 have occurred. Now, it is obvious already that Keynesian economics has failed, as the point of it has already failed. It has been non-effective in the United States. Now, on to our second contention, is that Keynesian economics has created artificial demand that has made this economy dependent on government spending. Now, at the moment in the United States economy, the economy is made up of 20% of government spending. There's then 9% of trade and investment and 71% of consumer spending. But 20% is completely dependent on government money. Now, this is money that has been taken out of other areas, such as healthcare, defense, pensions, welfare. This money has been taken away from these other areas that directly influence consumers' lives and put in to the economy. Now, this is an economy that could happily function quite well on its own, without this 20% of government money. But the US government has put 20%, is contributing to 20% of the economy. Now, if this 20% were to suddenly be gone, this would obliterate the economy. 20% is huge, Judge. And this has all been because of Keynesian economics. This is one of the consequences, one of the impacts as to why Keynesian economics is not successful in the economy. Now, our third and final point is about some of the consequences of Keynesian economics. Now, a main example is that due to Keynesian economics, due to the US government spending in in the economy, trying to get us out of the recession just recently from 2009, we solely this year have gone into 1.4 trillion more dollars in deficit. This causes us to become indebted to countries like Saudi Arabia, China, other foreign countries. Now, let's show you some impacts as to why this is bad. It is bad that we are going into debt, that we are at least $14 trillion in debt overall, and going deeper and deeper. Because, for example, evidence such as in Greece, in Europe at the moment, filed for bankruptcy, showing that deficit spending is not indefinite. It cannot go on forever. At some point, it will end, and it will end in bankruptcy, which is not intended, which is not good. Now, even more, this means we, as the United States, are losing control of our country. We are digging ourselves into a deeper and deeper hole, which we will not be able to dig ourselves out of. We don't have $1.4 trillion in our pockets just to help, just to get ourselves out of debt, just for this year. That's not even the half of the overall deficit the United States is in right now. So let's go over. Keynesian economics has failed for reasons that I gave you. The first being that it has never worked, that the point of it is to offset recessions, and yet we have been through 9 in the last 60 years. Successful, in order for Keynesian economics to be successful, these recessions would never have occurred. Now, second shows is that the government being so part of the economy makes it completely dependent. It takes away from the independence of the economy, which originally was not supposed to be government dependent. And third, that we are going into deeper and deeper debt, and the US is losing control of its country, all because Keynesian economics has failed. And I urge a vote for the proposition team. Thank you.
I would like to start my speech today by extending thanks on behalf of the opposition team, to my opponents, to my partner, to our audience, and of course to our judge for being here today and making today's debate possible. I would like to begin my speech going through the definitions, the burden, and the judging criteria presented by my opponents, then going to the opposition side of today's debate, presenting 2 arguments, going through a burden that we will be presenting, and at the end of my speech, addressing the 3 arguments brought up by my opponents. Now, to begin, on their definitions, they stated Keynesian economics was economics with a purpose of stimulating demand for the purpose of fighting recession. And on that point, I would like to, at this point out that government spending is not Keynesian economics. Keynesian economics is counter-cyclical spending, is only the stimulus spending that we have done. So, in today's round, we cannot count Social Security, Medicare, welfare, any of those programs, because those aren't Keynesian economics as their own definition has stated. As I will be going through in their points, this entirely invalidates several of their arguments and much of their evidence. Furthermore, on failed, I will be expanding upon that in the burden that we will be presenting. On their burden, we do believe that we should uphold our side of the debate. No one was questioning that. And on their judging criteria, we do agree that it should be the weight of the examples provided at the end of the day, which proves to the judge who has most effectively determined whether or not Keynesian economics has failed. Now, to move on to the burden that we will be presenting. If they're going to say that Keynesian economics has failed, they need to show that it is a total systemic failure. They cannot just simply say, well, it's probably not doing all that great right now. They need to tell us that it has actually failed, and that it has actually failed today. Not that it is failing and will fail tomorrow, that it has already failed at this point in time and is no longer serving its purpose whatsoever, is not in any way offsetting the recession. That is what failure means in the context of today's debate. So they need to prove to us beyond a shadow of a doubt that this is true if they expect us to accept it in the round. Now, moving on to my first argument. Our first argument will be on that of banks. I would like to point out that banks have already begun posting profits for the past several quarters. Banks are where this recession started. Banks, at the very beginning, were the people who said, guys, we may need to close our doors soon because we're in dire need of capital. We cannot afford to continue business. However, through Keynesian economics, countercyclical spending, giving bailout money to these banks are already posting profits again. If banks can recover from potentially going bankrupt and shutting their doors to posting profits in this brief amount of time, clearly Keynesian economics has not failed. If these banks are still being effective and earning money, they are not failing. Keynesian economics has not failed. Now moving on to our second point. Keynesian economics protects us. In the year 2000, around there, we began a deregulation of the financial market. We deregulated an entire set of rules that provided for safe banking in order to allow bankers to earn more money. 7 years later, roughly, we saw a massive market crash. All of a sudden, all of these rules which had been repealed, rules which were fundamentally Keynesian in nature, put in place to protect against recessions, because of the removal of these rules, we saw a recession take place. We saw banks stop posting profits because they had made far too risky decisions and had mismanaged their portfolios and mislabeled their portfolios. Regulation, and therefore Keynesian economics, has not failed because Keynesian economics was withdrawn from this situation, causing the greatest of the 9 recessions to happen since Keynesian economics was drafted. The most substantial instance of economic failure has been when we moved closer to a free market. Clearly, Keynesian economics has protected us in the other 8 examples. We can see that Keynesian economics indeed is not failing because it would have helped us through this recession, through this cycle in the market today. At this point, I would like to move on to my opponent's case and address their 3 arguments that they have presented for today's round. Their first argument was that on Keynesian economics having failed 9 times. However, once again, I would like to point out that we are not following strictly Keynesian economics. There were long holdouts, for instance, in the Great Depression, where FDR decided that he was not going to spend. He was not going to start stimulus packages, and it took an entire year for him to begin with his New Deal, to start putting out money into the economy, and that is when we start to saw it recover. When we started seeing it recover. When we implement Keynesian economics, we see that the market responds reasonably, which is the fundamental principle of economics, that markets will respond in rational ways to incentivization, to financial input. So we can see that when Keynesian economics is applied, when countercyclical spending happens, we see that the GDP grows, that money starts moving, and that things begin to recover. Keynesian economics, while it may or may not have been in place to extents throughout these 9 periods in history, has not been put in place enough, and it has prevented further recessions. It has prevented worse and deeper recessions, as we have seen with the deregulation on our financial market within the last decade. This deregulation has led to the greatest recession that we have seen in decades. Because of Keynesian economics, we have not had to face one this great until now. Because we moved away from Keynesian economics, we can see that the recession grew. Therefore, Keynesian economics has not failed, our politicians have failed by removing Keynesian economic theory from their playbooks. On their second point, they said that Keynesian economics has created demand that makes government spending important and that our market will collapse. However, once again, they stated 20% of total spending in the United States is government spending. However, 20% of total spending is not Keynesian spending. There is Social Security, there is healthcare, there is Medicare, Medicaid, there's welfare programs, food stamps. All of these programs are not Keynesian programs. They're not designed to be counter-cyclical. They're designed to continue for decades. Social Security has been around for over 50 years. This is not a Keynesian program that was brought around as soon as we got into a recession, so this point is entirely invalid. Furthermore, 71% of the market still belongs to the consumer. We can see that a larger share of the market belongs to the consumer. It is not solely on the hands of Keynesian spending. And their third and final point is that we are $1.4 trillion into a deficit. And deficit spending, I would like to point out, existed before we began our Keynesian spending as we moved into this recession. We were spending more than our budget allowed at prior times. So for this reason, that point is also entirely invalid. So for these reasons, I would like to urge a vote today in favor of the opposition team. Once again, thank you to everyone in the room.